Okay, so I recorded it. If anyone has any issues, you can just send me a text. I can always edit your voice out, or if you have video, whatever. I'm just gonna check to see who else is on there. We have a little bit of time. The market's opening up already, so I guess people will stream in, and I'll take people in the Discord. Yeah, I don't see any lost souls yet. So typically, what happens in pre-market is you're gonna have a move right away, and I wouldn't suggest to use those initial candles to trade unless you've done all your charting prior to it. But the reason why I started the session a bit into it was so that we can use that information to help us chart the levels. So this is the blank chart. What I'm going to do first is to add pivot points. So I always add pivot points, standard, for instance. And so by default, it's loading up my Camarilla points. So I'm just going to double click it to show you the type of points. Here's Camarilla, there's Fibonacci, traditional. And depending on what you use, I'm just going to go here. You can switch it to like Fibonacci is pretty common, and it's going to be a wider range. You can use classic, it's a different range. So we can go through those, as we go along with your questions. But essentially, these are all ratios of the prior day's range. And this one's a very wide one, it's classic. And the Camarilla that we were just looking at when I first popped up, it's a fairly narrow range. You see it has a bunch of lines, and then some wider ones. And what often happens is algorithms and even large traders will implement orders using automated techniques, or I guess basically limit orders. And they're setting these orders either where the liquidity is sitting at, if you're using the order books, or based on these principles of deviation from the prior day's range. And so these values here allow us to be aligned with those algorithms that are trading at this level. So you can see here, right in the middle here, this is the chart from Friday. So not to go into too much detail right now, but you can see there's a big pivot right here at this pivot. I'm not sure why it's not labeled here. It's normally labels the labels. So that's the S2 support. So the ones in blue here on my chart are support levels, and the ones in red here are resistance levels. And you can see there's almost a pivot here. There was some noise that day because of, I believe, Jay Powell speaking that kind of pushed things, and there was an avalanche. But what I wanted to emphasize here first for the Camarilla was when you load up a day's chart, or at more specifically for the evening session, what happens is a lot of times there is not a lot of volume, and there's still a lot of liquidity. You can see, I'm trying to point with my finger on the screen, but I'm pointing the cursor here slowly. You can see there's a lot of price movement in this range that, oh, sorry, I'm going to go to the today's range that's already set up. So these lines here have been calculated already based on using the prior day's high and low values. And they set up, this grid, use this pivot point indicator right away. And what you can see is that the first 3 lines above and the first 3 lines below, they're almost in this range of volume or sort of price where there was the most volume. I don't have anything else loaded up right now. I'll show you the volume price action stuff later. But basically, this kind of shows us that there is a lot of already, probably a lot of market participants who have entered and exited the market between here and here. So there's a good chance that there's already enough liquidity to fulfill the new orders that come in right now through this session here. And a lot of times from the 6 p.m. Eastern time open until at least 3 a.m. almost, which is the UK open. I'm just going to put a line here between these two blocks here. We don't see this kind of boom, huge up and down, which happens a lot of times when the New York session opens. There's a lot of new market orders coming in. You can see on Friday, it held, between these two lines very closely. I'm going to go to Thursday just to show you. Thursday was a bit of an anomaly because of the NVIDIA post-market news. But again, it didn't move very much relative to this line. And this is a case where maybe the Camarilla pivot points don't work, and I can go to that one, another explanation in a moment. On Wednesday, similarly, I'm just going to do the 3 o'clock block here between 3 and 6. You can see almost in the same pattern, price kind of stayed underneath this third Camarilla line. It did peak above near the end there. And that's when a lot of volume comes in at the end of the Asia session. But what I'm trying to emphasize is, okay, maybe some of these lines are useful. So we'll come back to revisit the Camarilla, but if you study this pattern for all the extended sessions from 6 until 3, almost exclusively you'll see it stay here, and then a lot of times when it hits line, it'll pivot back up. So if I use 5 minutes, I just switch to the 5-minute chart, and I'm just going to go back to the last week's example and see every time I touch this, it bounced. So there wasn't a lot of volume, but new orders would come in at those lines. So you could use that range, these lines, as a way to find pivots. So for now, we'll just stick to that. We won't go into too much detail. But just to say, for the evening session, it's quite different than the New York session or even the UK session. So that's something I wanted to show you right off the bat. You might already know that, obviously. But if we go back to today's block now, you can see it's still moving up. So, it's not really a good time to enter an order because it really hasn't tested these lines. But right away, you can see, there's going to be a test. It's already moving up. So some people may buy this here and trade it right to this point. So that's one way to trade it. But before we do that, what we want to do is to look at, okay, beyond this little movement towards this line, what is the overall day trend? So to do that, I look at a few things. I'll use the entire range from the priority. So we just block off that New York open here, 9:30. And this is 6 o'clock. So we have a range here and a range here. Now there are different ways to tag these points. So you can load in an indicator that will tell you the highs and lows. But just here, I'm going to put yet another line. So I'm going to hide these Camarilla points right now. So just in case you don't know this, I shared this particular trading view chart, excuse me, and the link is in the Discord. Find it there, or else I'll try to put it right now. Also in this chat, find a way to use the chat here. There's chat. Yeah, so it's there in case you don't have it. So I'm coming back to this now, and I'm going to go to that chart I shared earlier because I want to stay consistent to what I planned. So basically, I first just showed you what Camarilla pivot points are, and the 2, 3, 4, 5. Why not have those numbers denoted? But really, we're really interested in those ranges, and we'll come back to that. Now I want to show you what the prior full day range is, and probably most of you are experienced traders. I don't need to explain that too much, but this, for instance, would be the high of the day. Oops. This would be the low of the day. So I'm doing this manually, but you can and there's a bit of a time used to do this, but you can use the indicator sets to pull this up pretty easily, and I can send those to you. And next time we go through this session, I'll have those all loaded automatically. But for this first session, I wanted to make sure that everyone was on the same page. Just color coding them so they're black, so it's a bit easier. So we have the RTH low and high, and pretty much this is a really important range because that's where most of the volume has traded and tested price. And so if there are new sellers and new blocks, they're going to be, you can see a lot of sellers came in at 44.30 on Friday. And a lot of buy support came in at the low 60s. And I'm going to load something now just to add more to this now. This is called the imbalance index. A lot of you have seen this on our charts. And basically it tells you where there is so-called imbalances. So where price moves very quickly, you'll see these pink and you'll see these blue denoted boxes. And that helps us to also confirm whether or not there is still some liquidity or volume imbalance outside this range. So what I'm going to do now is just to use this price range and try to extrapolate if this is continuing, based on certain principles like Fibonacci expansion, we can get a sense of whether this will move. And what we might see is that this level here, I'm just going to put a little line for now, and I'm going to put it a dotted line. This is kind of interest, whether or not this kind of liquidity might get tapped, this imbalance. So typically I'll just quickly draw this fib right now. And I'm not sure if all of you have been following our Discord or not, but a lot of times I try to emphasize the use of the fibs to help determine what are the mechanical range mechanical movements of the price. And so if you think about price as a pendulum, it'll go one way, but once it gets the other way, it becomes a lot more attractive for the opposite side to take a position. So if the price went very, very high, then all of a sudden it's quite a good attractive position for a short to get in, because it's likely, if there's nothing else changing in the economic conditions, price may deviate or regress back to the mean at least. And that's kind of a natural tendency for price to always come back to at least close to mean value. So what I did was I just drew the first fib on our chart now. So I have the low at 4365.75. So I'm just going to save this file. So in case you're following, you can refresh it. Save. Sorry. And I have the high almost right here. I have it I need the magnet. So this little magnet button in TradingView will make sure that you anchor right to the top and right to the bottom. So it's kind of amazing sometimes if you're not on right at the tick, then you might be off a little bit. So I'm just going to hide these vertical lines. Oops, vertical lines. So right now, the line I marked earlier for the FEG here, this imbalance was around 44.45, and you can see at this fib extension, we see some calculation of that being, the 1.272 fib extension. So I'm just going to pull this line down to have some congruence there. And there's a mean here, so I'm going to put another one here. And so, oops. So right away, we see there is some sort of overlap between this information and this information without looking at anything further, without looking at the L2 books or without looking at bookmap. So just these two pieces alone is already quite strong. Like there's a very large balance here just from 2 days ago. So there's short-term, not short-term, sorry, price change in a relatively recent time. And then this price range expansion of Friday's movement suggests that we could push up to here without there being a lot of selling pressure. Now, what happens a lot of times is this expansion, when you expand on this range, is once we hit this 1.414, we do see a lot of new sellers coming in. And if you look at the L2 book or you look at the time sales, you'll see a lot of red, or you'll see, I guess, a lot of sellers coming right there. The limit order, sorry, there are a lot of limit orders that may get triggered. So I won't map the previous days, but if you guys want to do that, we can do that as well. But this is for tonight's range, so I want to make sure we finish that today. So I'll put another line here, and I'll make this a bit, that's my really I think it's gonna hit a wall there. And then definitely you'll see tomorrow, or if it does breach this 141, it's likely to get to 4468 and then have a major pivot there. That's not to say it's going to go straight through, but if it does go up 141 and come back and maybe test 3 or 4 times. This might be based on the Fibonacci's where we could expect the price to gravitate towards before new sellers come in. And if we go back 2 days into Thursday, coincidentally, that line matches up exactly with this wick, that beginning of the sell-off on Thursday morning, that big reversal. So kind of interesting, 446850 is an interesting level. So I'm going to mark on this chart as Friday range 1.618 extension. And a lot of times that alone, if I'm just doing the extension on aggressive move range, then we can go up there. But what I haven't looked at is whether or not this kind of is already an exhaustion, whether this has been moving too much already. So what we could do now is, if you go back to the Excel sheet or the PowerPoint sheet. So I've done the first three, I did A, B, and D. C is also taken care of because C is basically saying, let's look at the full range and let's look at the full day RTH range. Sometimes the extended hour range is, if you include extended hour range, the range might be a bit wider, but in this case, it's the same. So C and D in this case could be the same. So what I wanted to do here now is to look at within this range, do we have information of continuation? So if we just look at this fib here, it might give us some intel about whether this is going to continue. So I'm just going to mark it fairly quickly here. Whenever we see a lot of support at 8.32 and then subsequently at 0.5 and then subsequently at 0.618. So you can see this every time it came down and tested, it kept getting more and more support. Or not more and more, but it kept finding support. This is a pretty wide candle. I'm using 15 minutes. And even when it crossed to the 0.718, it just kept going. And that's quite strong sign that there is a bullish push across this, what would normally be a premium area with a supply zone. And so in this case, this probably suggests to us that the sellers aren't interested in holding this price anymore. And that would likely also mean that the stops that are above here from these sellers from prior selling points may get squeezed out or get out of the way and close their position. So that's a pretty good indication that we're not exhausted for this one uptrend. So I would be confident to say we might test this level, if not tonight, over the next 12 hours maybe. So that's not too far away. That's about 20 points, 23 points. But we also want to check, whether or not there's going to be some, potential short-term movement down. So you want to ensure that maybe you want to calculate what a potential reversal might be here. So if it comes up here and it hits this 1.0, which happens to be also the high, we're likely to see this come back down for some selling. So maybe there weren't sellers on Friday at the end of the day. But if there are enough buying interest through the Asian session, or maybe during the Asian market, there's some news or some activity in the Asian equities that causes a reversal, then we would definitely see, pivot around here and for this to come down. So I would say if you want to be certain about this pushing forward, you still must wait for the volume here and you must wait for this test. It's a bit risky now to go for this target. It's still viable, but that would be, we want to chart out everything. So what I just drew here was a potential support area that you want to look at. So this would be our first, I just put there. This would be my first potential discount area of interest. So I just put a line there and I have I'm going to draw a lot of lines in my charts, but this is how I chart usually. So whenever I see price come down to here, and I might even add 0.236. So if I see price come down here and I find there to be a lot of new support, like big icebergs or some exhaustion that's shown on the book map, then I'll say it's probably going to come here, dip, and push back up. We may not see that right away, but a lot of times, once this activity here has been exhausted, it will come down to this discount zone. So this is, if you go back to the chart that I laid out, this is that first retracement discount line that I put continuation daily uptrend, and I would put fib level 0.386. So I expect a potential test of 4389.5 sometime overnight. And I'm going to put back the Camarilla points now to see so far have there any overlaps. So just out of interest, I put the Camarilla points that R4 up top here at 4449.25. It's just a little bit above that 127. And usually the price doesn't, usually when the price gets all the way to R4, we use kind of exhaustion unless there was a real big move for that day for some reason, and for some reversal back to R3. So it kind of coincides that this might be a place of pivot. Camarilla points are saying a similar thing here. Like typically when you break the R3 or the S3, we will see a quick slide. And so maybe here at 0.236, or this S4 might be an area of support. It's still a bit early to know for certain which way it's going to go, in my opinion. But it's good to know, okay, this might be here right now, at least from what we see, a potential low of the day right here. We see this continuation uptrend. We see support here. But, you know, prices don't always go straight up, so we might have some dip. Unless something changes, we might not see a complete exhaustion for it to drop further, but let's keep charting. So I have those two things planned out. Now I'm going to say if there's continuation downtrend daily, what does it look like? So our downtrend was from a while back here, Thursday now, right? So there isn't really a continuation downtrend. The price has gone above the prior low here now. So in this case, it's not really possible for me to chart a continuation downtrend necessarily. Let me see if I can scope something. So I'm going to use the Thursday high and the Wednesday low, and I'm just going to reverse this pivot for a second. Now we have a lot of lines, so I'm going to hide some of this stuff here. So I'm just going to put this block here. The glasses, here we go. So I'm going to do the reversal on that. I have these templates set up so they color code things. So I'm just using this high and this low. So normally we would see on Friday we saw this Thursday we saw this drop, and it came right down to this 1.272. You know, we mentioned that being a pretty important number. It didn't hit exactly, but there was some buying support right away, and it pivoted back up. And then the next morning it came down and it went right to the 1414 right here. However, there is still this 161 exhaustion, and it's kind of strange, but sometimes it does follow and respect those pivots very closely. So here we see, you know, it continued up and it just ignored that completely. So it's hard to say whether or not, you know, we might see rejection here and for it to come down, but this is just an area to keep an eye on, and maybe it'll come down to this just based on this mechanical range. If we go back a few days, back to last Friday, the Friday before last Friday, we do see, you know, some pivot there, just above that 1681. So there's probably some liquidity there, hanging around there. And it's good to, if you have Bookmap or L2 data to scope in on that. Maybe I'll load those charts offline because I don't have them all loaded right now, but I can do that right after this as well. So this is where I just put a dark red line. For me, that's not necessarily like the absolute max, but that's a potential pivot. Like it might go there because it may exhaust this liquidity right here, and then there may not be a lot of buying support or interest from buyers to continue to push this climb, and then we may see a sharp reversal. So one thing to know is like the market's sort of like a rubber band. You'll keep stretching it, but as soon as one side lets go of that price action, that's not a good analogy. It's more like a pendulum. But if one side keeps pushing, but they let go right away, you'll see a quick sharp change to the other side. And right now, the liquidity on the buy side, or where the buyers are sitting, it's well below the 65 here. So I'm going to put another block here, and I draw this sort of as the absolute bottom here. And you can color code things however you want. I always use these beige boxes more recently for me to just pay attention to that being maybe a reversal zone. So if I'm trying to identify a target, I won't extend beyond that usually. Just on those ranges alone, it's been quite reliable. So I'm going to go back to the Excel sheet real quick. We have about 15 minutes. And we can always go on if we run out of time. I can just reload it again. You can pop on. So here, and I can upgrade the session, the Zoom subscription actually. So what I wanted to show was the chart here. So I did ABCD, and then the other ones are really using the intermediate highs. So if there is an intermediate high from the RTH or DTH. So I'll show you what that looks like here. So you see this low here, right here. Oops. It's not as low as the regular session low. I'm just going to use 15 minutes because it's a bit hard to see otherwise. Yeah. And then we see this medium high here, prior high. And excuse me, sorry. And a lot of times you can use that pivot point as a way to also create another fib extension. Because what will happen is this range here on its own will have a short-term range here as well. So we'll see a pivot based on that mechanical dynamic as well here. So I'm going to put a low here and a high here. And do the expansion. And so you can see all I did was I did the range on the ETH prior to Friday. So that's a pre-market Friday. And we already tested those levels well into the end of the Friday. So what I'm trying to suggest here is over the course of the next 8 hours, you can also continue to place these fibs through the night. So if we see a local low here and a local high, you can do the same exercise. And that may allow you to see where beyond this outer extreme, where price may come and reverse. If we look at this range here on Friday, you wouldn't be able to easily see without using the ETH hours how far it may come up without that move going up here. You could have used a reversal. So if I just put a fib for the reversal, but it's a bit harder to gauge because those gaps are a bit wider. So there's a lot of fibs on the screen now. But what I just drew here, what I had drawn here is the 1.0 on the Thursday overnight high and a 0 at the Thursday over end of market. And so you can see here, it doesn't really give you a lot of intel, but you do see almost a pivot at the 0.5, which is a common retracement level. It's not a fib actually, it's just half of the range for a big kind of aggressive sell-off. But it's not as precise. So you could dig into it and use this range here. Now I'm a bit off here. If I use this low here, which is the 430 low, might be more precise. So we're sort of sitting there, and it did go beyond a few points. So that's to show you that you can use these levels, but it doesn't it's not always pinpoint. It's not right to the point. So if you're banking on that point being 100%, it might not be the right way to go. So I drew this ETH range to emphasize during the course of the next 8 hours here. We can collectively do that. We can chart it tonight as the hours go by, what the ETH range may suggest. And you can also use the ETH from Thursday. Oops, my screen kind of glitched out. And the high from the RTH as a even wider range. Or sorry, even another range. So earlier I used the RTH low, the regular session low here, and I used the regular session high for the max range. But if I use a slightly higher low, which is this ETH low, it will give us another range which is not as wide as this one, but it's almost comparable. You can see the 121 and the 1217. Sorry, these two values that these two 1.272s, they're off by 4 points, right? But this gives us an indication. This is a narrower range. It might be less of expansion. And so what you need to also gauge into the day is to look at volatility and to look at implied volatility, know whether it will push this far. So really, the volatility during this market session here in Asia was very low, and then all of a sudden it spiked up because of Jay Powell news and so speaking and so forth. So that changed that range quite a bit. So if you expect there to be a correction of that range or another continued reaction to that news, then maybe you can use wider range, or else you can use this more narrow range. So it's not very easy, but you can put all of these lines here and basically watch as the price goes along these lines when you set a price target. If you want to be very conservative, you can just take profit before this point. If you're waiting to get into a short, then you might want to monitor when it touches these points, but be mindful that maybe it might go all the way to this 44665. So a lot of times people say it's a good time to short. So it might have hit one of these pivots and it's coming back, and there's a big sharp reversal, but it may continue to push up until it reaches this earlier max range that we looked at. So I keep this on the side. It tends to get very messy unless you're good at hiding things. I'm gonna leave this on the side here. And I'm just gonna put a dotted green line. So there's a lot of lines here, but the dotted ones are potential reversals based on these lower highs and higher lows. But I would caution people to take a short if they're just swinging for that day until it reaches this ultimate high. So if I just pull back very quickly here, I think our session will end in 5 minutes. So I'll just, for the next session, I'll have to Zoom subscribe so we don't have this issue. But if it does, we can just reconnect real quick. So this is, for me, sort of the map of the higher extremes. On the bottom side, we have this balance, and we can do the same exercise here with the high interim high of the pre-market and the low of the day, and I'm going to reverse that. Reverse. So I just did the same exercise using the lower high, but the same low now. And we see these numbers very, very close to this other range that we saw earlier. You see the 1618 that we were eyeballing as maybe a potential place for the market to sell down to if it reverses. And we see that 1416, so 1414 fib and the 1618 shows similarities. This one's a little bit lower. So I'll say, okay, maybe this is actually a potential lower point of mechanical movement. So that's how I would chart potential lows just based on ranges. All I'm looking at are what the market has provided the ranges, the pre-market, using the pre-market lows and highs, and using the regular session lows and highs. Very simple technique. It doesn't use any of the liquidity information. The other piece to it is, and we can do that on Tuesdays, then to use these ranges, which I'll map very quickly next time ahead of time on Tuesday. You can then overlap them with the book map. You can overlap them with the L2 book, and we can add more and more pieces to that. But basically, I wanted to show you the very first pieces of where to draw fibs. A lot of times, the price will respect this kind of mechanical range. What you can do also is to then chart when we have the opening hour set up. You can also do a fib on the opening hour. So I'm going to go to this real quick on Friday's opening hour, so we can see 6 o'clock until 7 o'clock or 6 o'clock to 8 o'clock is the opening range. It's